give him speaking terms.
I invited him. Yes, he accepts.
I mean, he's kind of boomer. I noticed in the Haas debates also.
Did he just leave, or did he accept?
Nah, he's here. Yo, Drew, you gotta accept the request, right?
Yeah, he accepted it. He's right there. Yo, Drew, can you hear us?
Yup, I'm here.
Okay, so basically what's going on here is basically Mac watched your debate against Haas, and he disagrees on a lot of the shit you said about the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. And basically Mac is like a well-respected historian. So
A well-respected historian. Is that
challenging you to
so?
a debate.
Based on what is Mac? What does Mac base that well-respected historian label on?
He has all the archives. He has everything. He's a well-respected historian.
So true. So true.
All right. I'm not an actual formal historian, but I'd say I know a thing or two about this topic. So, do you want to make some basic argument and then I can respond, or vice versa? What do you like?
I don't know. You begin with your argument. Explain to me why Russia's not fascist. Why they're really defeating the Nazis. Blah blah blah. All the same propaganda that has spoke. And we will pretend that these are new arguments and that this debate has not been rehashed a bajillion times by forces throughout history. To be honest, I have to admit I don't see the point of this debate. No one's going to be convinced of anything. So I don't know. You start with your side.
All right. Well, as far as I understand, your basic argument is that had Russia not invaded Poland, like everything would have been good, or something. World War II prevented, etc.
I don't think I argued that necessarily. I'm not saying that had Stalin not invaded Poland, World War II would not have happened, but it's the way. Obviously, in the timeline we inhabit, Stalin's pact with Hitler, containing secret provisions for the dual occupation of Poland and the destruction of the Polish state. This is the timeline in which we currently live, and this is in our timeline. This is how World War II started.
Yeah, so we'll try not to dwell too much into old history, but it is kind of necessary to talk about the alternatives and whatnot. And the easiest argument here is like, had the Soviets not concluded the pact, what would be the alternative? The alternative would be, well, Germany occupying all of Poland.
No, not necessarily. No, not necessarily.
Well,
we know that Hitler's ultimate plan was always the invasion of the Soviet Union, and he was pushing Pilsudski and Poland for a joint alliance against the Soviet Union, and Poland rejected that multiple times. Poland refused to join an alliance with Nazi Germany for the invasion of the Soviet Union, and it is only at that point that Hitler then concluded the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and he changed his plan tactically. Strategically, his ultimate goal was always the invasion of the Soviet Union,
right.
The destruction of the Slavs. But he obviously basically created he tactically changed his plans. He obviously wanted to avoid a two-front war, and so he invaded Poland with the acceptance, the complicity of the Soviet Union. Once the Polish state was destroyed, the Soviets came in to ensure that there was no possibility for the Polish nation to fight back. Obviously, Poland, we should remember, Poland held out for 6 weeks. Poland was fighting very, very hard, and it was really the Soviet invasion that sealed it for Poland, because they were already trying to defend Poland from three axes: the south, the north via Prussia, also the west. And
okay,
it was also,
so you're saying
it was obviously
the Soviet
when the Soviets came in from the other
blow. It was the final blow, is what you're saying.
It was a crucial blow against Poland, helping defeat Poland. And would Hitler have invaded Poland had he been unclear or unsure about what the Soviet Union would do? Then World War II would have gone completely differently. The way things conspired in real life, in the reality that we inhabit, is that Hitler was able to begin World War II with the invasion of Poland with the acceptance, the support of the Soviet Union.
Okay, let's go back just a little as far as Poland goes, because yeah, Poland did at the very end, basically in 1939, decline German overtures to it, but Poland was quite flirty with Germany until that point. So that's one. Now, obviously, you can say,
Well,
okay,
explain that point.
What mattered, okay,
explain that point. How was Poland close to Nazi Germany up until that point?
Well, it's quite well documented that whenever
What
Germany...
documents?
Are we going immediately to sources, or do you want the rhetorical point first?
Okay, well, first give me the rhetorical point.
So the fact of the matter is that Polish, or I should say German overtures, so as you said yourself, like the Soviet, or the... I'm mixing the words here slightly, sorry, it's like midnight. The German policy ultimately was to go after the Soviets, and obviously Poland is in between of those. Now, initially, or at least nominally, Poland did have like a policy of equilibrium, or like they were playing, the two stools, but they were always more keen to work with Germany than to the Soviets, or to support any Soviet initiatives against the Germans.
The Soviet Union offered no. What initiatives did the Soviet Union offer Poland against? What initiatives did the Soviet Union offer Poland against Nazi Germany? The Soviets actually probably saw Poland as the Soviet Union probably saw Poland as a bigger threat than Nazi Germany.
Listen,
because of the number of Poles inside Poland. I mean, because of the number of Ukrainians inside Poland.
Wait. On 3 occasions, the Soviets in 1935, in 1938, and in 1939. On all of these 3 occasions, France, Britain, and the Soviets had some kind of understanding against Nazi Germany, which, as a prerequisite, had Poland's membership in those alliances that were supposed to happen. In 1935, it was the Eastern Pact. This was a very, very big initiative that started in 1933 between the French and the Soviets, and even the British kind of supported it. And guess who, rejected it? It was Poland. Poland, not just that they rejected it, they completely sabotaged the whole effort and lobbied hardcore against Romania joining that same Eastern Pact. In 1938, when Munich was happening, not just that Poland completely, did the same thing by lobbying Romania not to allow Soviet support to Czechoslovakia, but they actually participated in the partition of Czechoslovakia, which nullified the Soviet-German or the Soviet-Polish non-aggression pact. Poland occupied the region of Teschen, which admittedly was contested, but nonetheless, they literally jointly with Germany during the Munich occupation. And not so long after that, they also had a little border skirmish with Lithuania and occupied a contested part of Lithuania, which was also a pretty big problem for the Soviets, because obviously one of the biggest fears the Soviets had was this like springboard thing through the Baltics to Leningrad. I mean, geographically, it just makes sense, right? Estonia is 50 kilometers away from Leningrad. So Poland set up a precedent that the Baltic states can just be bullied by other countries. As a matter of fact, this happened with Memel. Germany occupied Memel also like a month after this thing happened, like between Poland and Lithuania. So Poland was consistently, for like 6 years, from 1933 up to 1939, either indirectly or almost directly in relation to Munich, working with Germany, or at least in German interests, geopolitical interests in Europe at the time, right? So that's a pretty bad look, is all I'm saying. Now, in 1939, yeah, they, cleared up their head a bit, but still, they did not want any Soviet help. And in fact, British and French diplomats were saying how much of a nuisance Poland was in creating a quote-unquote Grand Alliance, which actually was the basis for the later Grand Alliance in 1941. So yeah.
Listen, let's just recount all the tension, the attacks by the Soviet Union against Poland during the 30s, the Soviet Union always regarded Poland as an enemy state, because of how.
I'm sorry, that's
because
technically not true. Do you
no,
know?
no, it's true
who
because
was the Soviet foreign minister in the 1930s before Molotov? Do you even know his name?
I will explain to you. I'll explain to you how many
Okay.
how many
Poles?
how many Poles were killed in the Polish operation of the NKVD, 1937.
Polish operations. So are we discussing the Great Purge now?
I'm discussing. I'm explaining
Listen,
to you. You're talking about how
I would be very
the Soviet
interested.
Union.
Okay.
No. Let me explain. Let me explain.
Okay, go ahead. You make your point.
You're claiming that the Soviet Union had an interest in being friendly with Poland. The Soviet Union wanted some kind of alliance with Poland, but Poland was sabotaging the Soviet Union. If this was the case, why is it that the NKVD carried out mass anti-Polish, ethnic cleansing operations in the Soviet Union against Poles, deporting hundreds of thousands of Poles? Hundreds of thousands were killed. Hundreds of thousands were killed during the Great Purges. There was
hundreds of
the
thousands
Soviet
of
Union.
Poles. Damn, I didn't know that.
Yes, hundreds of thousands of Poles were killed during the deportations and the mass purges. And
I think you're talking about the total for the entire Great Purge. Okay, admittedly, I don't know.
No. Hundreds of thousands of Poles were killed by the NKVD in these mass pogroms. And also, we should not forget. There were millions. I mean, during the 30s, the Soviet Union starved 4 million Ukrainians to death, and whole Ukrainian villages were trying to cross the border into Poland and begging Poland to invade. And what did Poland do? Poland signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviets in 1932. Is that not correct?
That's correct, although I fail to see the correlation. But
so you're claiming that Poland consistently sabotaged the Soviet Union in the 30s, but in fact they actually had a non-aggression pact, and the Poles actually abandoned the Ukrainians to their fate with the Holodomor inside the Soviet Union. Millions starved to death, and there were whole villages were trying to cross the border, begging the Poles to invade,
and they signed the non-aggression pact. All right. So as far as the non-aggression pact,
that didn't preclude the Soviet Union from still deporting hundreds of thousands of Poles and killing hundreds of thousands of Poles. This non-aggression pact.
I would be interested in seeing any documents where you could tie the opinion of the Polish government. Again, we're talking here about strictly foreign policy. I'd be very interested to see where does Pilsudski or Beck, the foreign minister of Poland at the time, where in any of whatever memorandums, anything, where they mentioned the Polish operation as being something of decisive significance to their effort to do all of that. By the way, do you remember when I said the Eastern Pact happened, when this initiative happened? In 1935. So even if you're just strictly following the timeline, and I take your whole argument as granted, your timeline still doesn't add up, because the first initiative was in 1935. Now, as far as the the Holodomor goes, no, we can discuss the Holodomor. And no, it wasn't a genocide, I'm sorry.
Because what's your argument that millions of people starved across the entire Soviet Union, so it can't technically be an ethnic genocide?
No, this is not about technicalities. Listen, I don't want to digress into Holodomor too much, but I'm not running away from this. We can address it a bit later, but I don't think it's too important to the topic. Anyway, so as far as Holodomor, I don't really see, again, as far as the topic is concerned, I don't see your argument. Like, this happened and they signed the non-aggression pact. Is this kind of not working in my favor in some view?
No.
I don't really see what are you saying here.
We're talking about the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and you're claiming that the Soviets had no option but to ally with Nazi Germany through the non-aggression pact, Molotov-Ribbentrop, because Poland kept on trying to subvert Soviet efforts for an alliance, and the Western powers kept on trying to subvert.
That wasn't. I don't want to pin everything on Poland, but you did bring up Poland immediately. So, but yeah. But again, you're only kind of valid, like some, it's not really an argument, like this argument doesn't exist, but that the Polish operation, which by the way wasn't, I mean, these operations, these are bureaucratic names, like they were targeting territorial regions which were inhabited by Poles, same as they had like a Greek operation or whatever. Like the Soviets weren't genociding like 2,000 or more. Like there were a lot of these operations, as in 2,000 or more ethnicities. This was just more of a bureaucratic way to organize things.
Wow. So your argument is the Poles were not the chief subjects of genocide. Every other ethnic minority group across the Soviet Union. What a beautiful society we're talking about and defending right now.
Okay, again, the Great Purge is a completely different topic. Okay, I'm just saying like it wasn't a genocide against Poles at all. Okay, like
but clearly Poles were targeted based on their ethnicity.
Okay, but what if they called it? What if they didn't name these operations like that? What if they just called it like the Eastern Operation? Like, in essence, it would be the same. Like, what even is your point here?
Are you kidding, man? Are you kidding? So, you think my argument is that it's genocide because they called it the Poland operation rather than anything else? No, it's genocide because they specifically targeted Poles based on their ethnicity.
Whatever. I don't want to get into the Great Purge. Completely different discussion.
No, it's relevant to the argument because you're trying to argue.
You're saying it's related to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact because it gave a bad taste to the Polish state about the Soviets. Even though it happened after Soviet attempts to
it's a counter to your argument. It's a counter to your argument that the Poles in the West sabotaged any attempt at
how is it a counter when that happened after the Soviets created the initiative in 1933 even, but I think only in 1934 it was brought up to the Poles. So 1934 at the latest, and the Great Purge happened 3 years later. 4 in fact. I think the operation started in 38. In any case,
I'm just laying down a history.
Later, okay, you cannot keep making these arguments. Like
I'm laying down a history for you. I'm laying down a timeline for you of Soviet actions against the Poles that clearly we're not hospitable towards the Poles. And so your argument that Poland sabotaged the Molotov-Ribbentrop, sabotaged any attempt by the West.
I'm addressing your argument directly, and your argument that how can you say you're laying out the timeline when the timeline, again, can you please acknowledge that the first Soviet initiative to create collective security in Europe was in 1934, and that the Polish operation happened in 1937/8. Can you acknowledge this? You can Google these, in fact, if you want.
No, I obviously yes, but I'm talking about there's a long history of
That's one event. That's one event. You cannot say long history.
No, it's not one event. This is throughout the 30s. The Soviet Union was hostile to Poland, and some of those grand treaties you're talking about, basically, the Western Allies, Britain and France, wanted Poland to agree to the Soviet Union, using Poland as a base against Nazi Germany, and basically just transiting all their troops through Poland, which could in itself have constituted an invasion of Poland.
It could have been limited only to military help, equipment help, not necessarily deploying the troops. Listen, these things were negotiated during these things. The point is that Poland did not even allow for it even to be discussed. It was like a unilateral, complete deadlock on any attempt to create any initiative. And by far the worst offense was during Munich. Like, you cannot tell me this is some honest Polish fear. By the way, you brought up the Soviet-Polish non-aggression pact. Clearly you didn't listen to me. During Munich, when Czechoslovakia's Teschen province was occupied by Poland, before they did this, the Litvinov, the Soviet foreign minister, told to Poland explicitly that if they do that, the non-aggression pact will be terminated, because one of the clauses in there was not to create any aggressive moves against any other third party. So they directly broke, I think, the second clause of that treaty, and the non-aggression pact was terminated. In fact, it was terminated, but it was more of almost a bluff by the Soviets, but the Polish did it anyway. So they did actually terminate it, but they didn't expect they would do that. So the Poles went out of their way, even with like.
I'm not going to defend Polish
like
actions. I won't defend Polish actions with the Munich Agreement. That's disgusting.
Okay, fair enough. But how can you then?
Even Churchill, even Churchill himself.
The significance
I mean,
here.
Churchill
you can say
himself
that you will not defend them, but say that all the other two attempts were justified, because the significance is the same.
No,
they were sabotaging
I'm
a very important.
I'm saying here,
Churchill in Europe.
Churchill himself said that the Soviets should have been involved during the Czechoslovak negotiations. There should not have been.
Churchill was actually anti-appeasement, so I'm not surprised.
Churchill, yeah, of course, and obviously I'm anti-appeasement as well. So okay. I would actually agree with you. It would have been better for the West to have allied with the Soviet Union in 1938 and not broken up Czechoslovakia. Of course, I would agree with you there, even though I think the Soviet Union, it was an odious.
We did it, boys. All right, continue.
So I agree with you on that point, but I still nevertheless maintain, even regarding the Czechoslovak, the Munich betrayal, I still nevertheless maintain that the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was wrong. It still constituted basically an alliance between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. And it should never have happened. There would not have been an invasion of Poland by Nazi Germany in 1939 had Soviet Union not agreed to it. And also, you have to address the fact that Stalin and the Soviets were seeking a negotiation, a settlement with Hitler as early as 1936. So these negotiations were ongoing for years.
1936, really? That's very interesting to see what you're talking about, because I think I know, but listen.
There were discussions between the Soviets and the Nazi Germans from as early as.
Do you know what happened in 1936 in Europe? Like, what's the most important event in 1936? It was the Spanish Civil War. So even if any negotiations did happen, I'm not sure what you're talking about. Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. But even if there were any negotiations, by summer of 1936, they collapsed. Okay, because 1936 summer was the worst period between like any formal communication, let alone like reapproachment negotiations, quote unquote, between the Soviet Union and Germany. So I'm not sure if this stands. There's a consensus in literature that, especially during Litvinov, you don't know who Litvinov is, which is a problem, but he's basically the most pro-Western Soviet politician that maybe ever had any position as big as him. And this was the Soviet foreign minister during the Nazis until Molotov replaced him in 1939. In any case, for you to say that there were any significant negotiations during a politician that was so pro-Western at such an anti-German time in Soviet history, sorry, I mean, it's not connecting. Now, as far as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact goes, so you do acknowledge that the Poles were in the wrong to sabotage these alliance initiatives, etc., right?
Well, I don't agree that Poland was solely responsible for the so-called sabotage of Western agreements with the Soviet Union. Obviously, there was the whole strategy of appeasement. Chamberlain, people who I regard as horrible.
Blame on Poland, because Poland, I mean, they did have some legitimate security interests. They are, after all, between two major powers, right?
And also you have to also Poland, of course, had been dealing with. I mean, the Red Army was mobilized 1932, 1933. They were mobilizing on the western border. There was a long history of Soviet hostility towards Poland. There were also, the purges of the Poles inside Poland.
I give you a finger
inside the Soviet Union.
Hand, okay?
But anyway, what I was going to say, I am just as against Chamberlain and the strategy of appeasement as you are.
Okay.
I'm just saying it would be one thing for the Soviet Union to conclude a non-aggression pact with Hitler and with Nazi Germany.
Let's start talking about the
However, it was not just a non-aggression pact. It went a step further because there were secret protocols for the division up of Eastern Europe between Nazi Germany and Soviet Union. And so by the end of 1939, this was not just a non-aggression pact. It was basically a de facto alliance between the Soviets and the Nazi Germans.
I know what the conditions of the multi-military pact.
And they collaborated in the invasion of Poland and the destruction of the Polish state.
That's very well documented. Now listen, I don't need a history lesson. Like, what's your actual point here? Actually, I guess I can respond because you rambled for a bit. Listen.
No. It's very clear. It's very clear.
But
this was not just a non-aggression pact. They effectively begun World War II together. Because in 1939 they were effectively co-belligerents.
Yeah, the invasion of Poland was the start of World War II, at least.
Yes, and the Soviet Union collaborated in the invasion of Poland.
When did the Soviets invade?
They invaded 17 September, but they were also secretly assisting the German invasion prior to that.
What are you talking about, like intel gathering or something?
Yes. Things like this.
Okay, that was relatively minor. Listen, they did establish these spheres of influence and whatnot. So, of course, they had to know, like, where are they going to meet or whatever. They didn't want to start fighting each other, especially the Soviets, of course.
There were actually instances of cooperation in the field. Because, let's not forget, it was a 6 week...
What I was going to say,
the Poles held out for 6 weeks.
It took them over 2 weeks to invade. Okay? Now, you maybe want to say that this was like, the Poles maybe would have lasted for like 2 more weeks. Fact of the matter is...
No, not just 2 more weeks. The Poles could have held out for a lot longer if the Soviet Union did not come in.
That's very, very questionable. Listen, the Polish government was just about to escape to Romania. Okay? There's a debate when they exactly left, but just about now. Their entire command structure was collapsing, and so did their military. I mean, the Germans completely decisively... Listen, Germans did war games, okay? In the best case scenario, by German analysis, which, by the way, proved to be correct, and this is without Soviet help, Poland would have lasted for maybe 50 days.
You know what Molotov said? You know Molotov himself, he says, a short blow by the German army and subsequently by the Red Army was enough for nothing left of this little bastard state. So
I know what Molotov says. Listen, that's a propaganda speech.
Molotov himself was saying the Soviet Union helped to destroy the Polish state, which is my point the whole time.
Obviously, if you look at it literally, yeah, they did occupy like a third or so of Poland. In a literal sense, they did help it. But how decisive was their help? It wasn't very decisive. Fact of the matter is,
it was decisive because
the Polish military de facto collapsed by the time the Soviets intervened.
Okay, but let me say this.
By the way, the Germans, there's a very interesting communication at this very critical time in these 2 weeks happening between Schulenburg and Molotov and Ribbentrop. Ribbentrop to Schulenburg and then him to Molotov. And the Germans were telling the Soviets, like, invade now, like, go in. You can read these documents, literally, word by word. And the Soviets were constantly stalling. Now, obviously, this doesn't have to say, like, we cannot know exactly why they were stalling. But the fact of the matter is they could have, if they wanted, they were invited to invade much earlier. And it's very, kind of logical, I mean, just for a military perspective, that they wanted the Polish army to collapse first. Because A, they would suffer less losses, and B, they aren't helping the Germans, who in the end are their enemies, which they recognize by now.
They recognize by now. No, they did not recognize this when they were doing a joint invasion of Poland. Like,
they did. I'm sorry.
Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question, Mac.
Okay.
Let me ask you a question. Okay. The Soviet Union, as part of these overtures to the West early in the 30s, wanted Poland to allow Soviet troops to cross through Poland to attack Nazi Germany in the case of war, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So why would Hitler have invaded Poland if he was unclear about what the Soviet Union would do in the event of an invasion of Poland? So if he did not have this co-belligerent pact, if he did not have this non-aggression pact, would he have invaded Poland in September 1939, unclear whether it would also draw in the Soviets? This is another key part of my point. Hitler may still have eventually invaded Poland. He still would have eventually wanted war with the Soviet Union. But would it have happened in September 1939? It would not have happened in September 1939 if the Soviet Union was tactically, even if the Soviet Union was
Okay.
unclear as to how it would respond. If they had, if there was ever the possibility that the Soviet Union could intervene, then Hitler would not have invaded in September 1939.
That's not as true as you might think. Now, obviously, the position of the Soviets was very important to the Germans. You have to understand that German pressure on the Soviets started in May, and the invasion plan was drafted. Weiss was drafted in April, so a month early, and that plan was to be executed on September 1st or later. Okay, so it did align in the end to be September 1st, but it was all a part of German policy, foreign policy, in preparation for that invasion, to put immense pressure on the Soviets for them to, establish their positions, establish their position. So you're not wrong in that. Yeah, that did matter, but the Germans would have probably invaded anyway, sooner or later. When they thought they sufficiently basically scared or lobbied against any kind of Soviet, French, British alliance, they probably would have invaded, even if the Soviets didn't formally, like on paper, establish their position. So that's one. That's another thing is, what did I just say? So Soviet, British, French alliance. So who was sabotaging that? Poland. Quite ironically, but
sorry, say that again. Sorry,
actually a pretty good.
Wait, can you say that again? Sorry, I didn't hear.
I was saying that one of the main German foreign policy goals was to prevent a Soviet, British, French alliance, and Poland was a pretty good object of stopping that at that point, which is quite ironic, right? But also, as far as Germany was concerned, actually it was Britain who was Germany's prime enemy. The British unilateral guarantee of Poland also worked very, very poorly in favor of creating any kind of grand alliance, because this was basically a signal, not just to the Soviets, but also to the French, that, although the French also did take lead eventually, they were pressured into doing so, but anyway, that guarantee happened in the middle of creating, again, some kind of initiative / alliance talks between France, Britain, and the Soviet Union. So the British policy at this time was quite contradictory to all of that. They just unilaterally guaranteed Poland, kind of threw their hand into the fire, said fuck it. That was a pretty spontaneous, by the way, guarantee.
I agree with you that
completely. Okay,
I'm going to say, and my
there's another point
clear.
here. Okay,
Britain's actions with appeasement were
that actually scared. Listen, this is not the end of the point. It goes a bit deeper, because this did. Oh my God, this did initially scare the Germans and whatnot, but by August, the British started to be quite a more lenient and quite a bit more like shaky on their position. And they kind of hinted, especially Halifax, that maybe they could like negotiate with Germany, quote unquote. And as soon, look at the timing, August. So this was like very, very, very soon, or just a bit earlier than the invasion started. As soon as the British kind of started to be a bit more shaky on their position, on their guarantee, as soon as Halifax gave a hint that they could negotiate something here, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact did happen subsequently. But both the Germans and the Soviets took the hint. Britain is not intervening in Poland. And that was decisive. That was very, very indecisive. The policy of appeasement, which you claim not to support, extended.
Of course I don't
even
support.
into
Chamberlain was
it expanded
horrific.
even into this period. Like, it didn't stop with Munich and with the guarantee of Poland. Even after the guarantee happened, Halifax was still giving hints to the Germans that they might, kind of negotiate something here. And also, at the same time, in summer of 39, when the negotiations with the Soviet Union were happening between France and Britain, this is the final pretty popular attempt to do that, Halifax again gave the order to his representative Drax to go, and I quote, as slowly as possible in these negotiations. All this is to say that A, Germany saw this, even without necessarily the Soviet guarantee and their definition of the position, as a very important, decisive, and in fact, a plan which is in line with what they predicted as September the 1st to be the start of their invasion back in April. Two, Soviets got a hint that the British and French, and Polish, of course, are absolutely not serious about this whole situation, that they're just stalling as much as possible. And in view of that, and that's the C point, the Soviets had, well, two alternatives. Stay completely numb and just see as the invasion of Poland unfolds, maybe not on September 1st, maybe on September 5th, September 10th, but it would have happened. I mean, this is, obviously, we cannot do all history all the way out, but all the signals were there, all the kind of blocks were aligning. Or they could have taken some initiative, not played a minor power, but tried to play a major power, which they were, and take the most they could out of the situation. And okay, they did, you can say, collaborate with Germany in all of this, but simultaneously as they were quote unquote collaborating, they were creating defensive lines, even moving defensive lines which are further into the Soviet Union on the border of Poland. Now, why the hell would they be doing that? Well, obviously to defend against Germany. They also wanted to take all about
I have to say, is that really true? Because Stalin was caught off guard by the invasion Operation Barbarossa.
That's, I'm sorry to say, a myth. It's not true, and I will stand by this position.
Okay, but if it is a myth, then why were the Soviets just in utter disarray the first weeks and first months of the war?
Listen, man, in the strongest European military, actually not European military, when the strongest military in the history of humanity invades you suddenly without any definitive the intelligence saying that it would happen when it did happen, yeah, your military will be kind of flabbergasted. And the fact of the matter is, German military was better than the Soviet. And this is a very hit or miss position. Obviously, Stalin was shocked. Like, obviously, I don't even know how to explain this. Like, this was a very, very major event for the Soviet Union, and possibly an existential one. In fact, it was.
No, of course it was existential. Yeah, of course it was existential.
But this more so speaks of German military competence than Soviet shock or disbelief, or let's say disbelief that they would be betrayed. Like, they knew they would be betrayed. It was more of a disbelief. Oh my God, this is actually like happening right now. But Stalin was not like, he didn't go to his dacha for like 2 weeks or whatever. That did not happen. Stalin was completely over, like he worked 16 hours a day for the first 2 weeks of the invasion. And this is, I can give you a source, I have it on hand from from one Swedish historian. So yeah, it's not just this like some personal stories about Stalin working or whatnot. The Soviet military budget increased from about 10-11% in 1938 to 35% in 1940. A third of the entire budget, like national budget, went to the military in 1940. Now, why would they do that if they expected Germany, or sorry, they didn't expect Germany to invade? There was only one power that would invade the Soviets at this point, and it was Germany. And that's why they increased the military budget as much as they did. So both in policy and in actions, the Soviets expected the German invasion. And this is just a blatant fact of the matter.
I need to ask you this. So
Okay.
even if this was so your overall argument is that the Soviet Union was boxed into signing the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, correct?
I think it was like a very like realpolitik and kind of brutal decision they had to take. Like, and I think it was a morally just position. I don't want to moralize it even at all, but if I had to, like, I don't agree with it in principle. But I think when you actually analyze this whole situation, it wasn't. It was in their best interest to do that, and they did it.
So if they were forced into this, because the West had kind of betrayed them in a sense, or
they could have
appeased
stayed
them.
numb. They could have stayed numb, but
why?
That's a known
Why
position,
is it?
no?
But why is it that there were the secret protocols dividing up Eastern Europe, and why is it that the Soviet Union actually annexed 13.5 million Polish civilians? And when they annexed this massive chunk of Poland, why is it that they arrested retreating Polish troops? And why is it that they made efforts to try and destroy the Polish intelligentsia, the officer corps, anyone associated with the state in Poland? If they were still preparing for a war with the Nazi Germans, why is it that they would take such pain, such efforts to destroy the Polish state in the areas that they occupied? It seems to me that they were preparing a long, lengthy annexation. And also, why would they arrest these retreating troops, and why would they execute the Polish officers and stuff like that? If they were really preparing for a war with Nazi Germany, and they still regarded Hitler and Nazi Germany as the chief enemy, why would they take these steps to destroy Poland, which had just fought a war against Nazi Germany?
Okay, I'll address this.
Like for example, in your telling, like the Soviet Union moves into the space. So in your telling, like the Polish state is evacuating the country, and so the Soviets move in and they make sure that this area of Poland doesn't come under direct Nazi rule. That's your telling. So in a way, it's almost like they're protecting the Poles. But why do they then destroy the Polish state in that area? Why do they decapitate the Polish
They didn't
leadership?
protect the Poles because they were like, oh no, poor Poles. This very rarely happens in history. It was in their best interest to occupy that part of Poland. In fact,
if it was
Germans
okay,
were very, very hesitant to give anything. This wasn't in the German plan up to this point. Like, it was a bit of a curveball what Stalin did with those protocols. And yeah, I will not deny the Soviets initiated those, but it makes sense. And the fact of them, like when you see how Soviet politicians spoke about this, and again, I think it's much more important how they actually physically prepared for a war than. Listen, I mean, you were talking about Katyn, and I don't know about this prisoner story. Listen, Katyn is a messy topic. As soon as I mentioned Katyn, Haas leaves. Anyway, that's a messy topic. Listen, this really can be explained simply as securing your back ranks, which is something all powers did, and which is pretty common practice in war. Now, can you say the Soviets were kind of brutal in doing so? Okay.
Why don't?
But also, this wasn't really. These were primarily, almost exclusively, in fact, like 80-90% officers. Barely, I mean, you can say officers are intelligentsia, but what I'm saying is they were connected with the military. So it was clearly more of a military affair than a cultural, genocidal, quote unquote, affair or whatever you're claiming here.
There were at least 8,000 Polish intelligentsia killed.
8,000 out of, well, okay, so a fifth.
It's clearly a decapitation. It's an attempt to make sure that they would
speak about Katyn, because if I get some things,
but it's an attempt. Yeah, but you can't just back out of it by just saying, oh, I don't really want to speak about
it. Listen, Katyn is more. I almost never I don't know where do you connect, where do you make these correlations? That Katyn somehow meant that the Soviets were preparing for long-term occupation. I mean, actually,
that's so obvious.
Actually, you know, you could say actually, okay, maybe they were okay, but
okay,
what parts of Poland?
But let me okay.
What parts of Poland did they occupy?
Let me put a counter proposal to you. So,
okay.
So let's just use logic here, basic reasoning. Why would it be in the Soviet interest to decapitate the Polish leadership, the Polish intelligentsia, execute Polish officers, arrest fleeing Polish troops?
The Polish?
Why would it be in the Soviet interest if Poland had just fought a war?
Do you think the Polish intelligentsia and the Polish elite would be very friendly towards the Soviet Union after the events of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact?
Well,
obviously they wouldn't. They didn't want to.
Okay, so your argument is the Polish elite and the Polish government and officers would not have liked the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union invaded the country with Nazi Germany. Therefore, we had to execute them all. Of course. I mean, that's fucking insane.
Listen, man,
that's stupid.
I don't know what to tell you.
But it's dumb.
If you want to condemn the Soviet Union on some moral grounds that they killed these people, okay, but you cannot make some broader strategic, like you cannot infer geostrategic positions of the Soviet Union based on that. Also,
but I don't understand. Why carry out
the parts of Poland that were occupied by the Soviet Union were barely Polish. These were
80% that is such bullshit. There were 13.5 million Polish in the areas that they annexed.
There was. Poland has a lot of population, but it was majority Belarusian and Ukrainian.
That's not even true.
Do you know where Poland got these territories from? It was from 1920s. These were now. I'm not saying this is a legitimate claim because of that. I'm saying that, I mean, does Poland today claim those parts of Belarus and Ukraine? Obviously, they don't, because it was kind of it was a very brief, basically, occupation by Poland of those territories. So you could say, yeah, the Soviets were preparing
a brief occupation of their territories. Man, okay, based on what? The fact that Poland was petitioned by Russia and Germany throughout history.
Sorry, I cannot magically.
Bro, if we go back 500 years, this territory was Polish. This territory was Polish-Lithuanian for 500 years.
Yeah, and then the Poles literally decapitated Lithuania in the 1930s too. So all countries were going after their territories and interests. You're not really making a point here.
Well, my point is the fact that so you and all the associated tankies argue that Soviet Union had no choice. They had to do the non-alliance, non-aggression pact.
I'm not saying they had to do it, okay? I said it was completely objectively by far their best interest to do this. So again, what is the alternative to doing?
I mean, based on what? Based on what? Bro,
based on the fact that if they didn't do it, the only other position is to stay numb, to do nothing, and then Germany would just invade all of Poland.
No, but that would not have happened if the Soviet Union did not conclude the non-aggression pact with Hitler.
The Germans were much more interested in the British position, which was the one starting to shake up at the same time as they were shaking up the British-Soviet talks. So the British kind of still this mentality of appeasement was the one which gave enough confidence to Hitler. By the way, they did actually, the Germans did account, even if the Soviet troops entered Poland, they did even account to that. Now, by the way, if the Soviet troops did enter Poland, the Poles would have probably fought the only reason that could have happened if the Soviets unilaterally just entered Poland. That wouldn't be based on any agreements. So I really doubt the Poles would have accepted Soviet help, even if they didn't sign the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, but just stay numb. And when the Germans did eventually, a week or two later...
I've got two arguments here, though. Poland would not have been invaded. It is very unlikely that Hitler would have invaded Poland.
They would have invaded Poland.
Because
Listen,
Hitler's ultimate aim was always the invasion of the Soviet Union, wasn't Poland.
How do you get to the Soviet Union? This is why they were working.
Yeah, I know, but think about it logically and rationally. Think about it logically and rationally. Hitler kept on offering Poland.
Internationally.
Hitler kept on offering Poland to join the anti-Comintern alliance, and Poland refused time after time again. So why does the Soviet Union agree a non-aggression pact with Hitler and then invade Poland in a joint invasion, decapitate the Polish leadership, a country that consistently refused to ally against you, a country that consistently... it doesn't make sense. And why decapitate the Polish leadership? If they were really serious about trying to defend the Soviet border, wouldn't it make sense for the Polish government in exile to be operating out of the Soviet-occupied zone? Wouldn't it make sense for no decapitations of the Polish leadership? Wouldn't it have made sense that the Soviet Union in 1939 joined with...
The Poles declined Polish help. Like, the Poles did not want to work with the Soviets. We were making all of these beautiful stories about what could have been, what should have been, and I don't disagree. This would have maybe been a better outcome. The fact of the matter is that the Polish elite, especially, was deeply anti-Soviet and deeply anti-Russian, even on an ethnic basis.
But the proximate cause of that is the fact that the Soviet Union had an anti-Polish policy for all of the 30s, basically.
I mean, I don't know if you really want to defend the Pilsudski government and what proceeded after it, but whatever. I can really easily do an Uno reversa here and point out what the Poles were doing in the aforementioned Belarusian and Ukrainian occupied territories. But, I don't even want to play that card because it's so, it's so irrelevant to debate, in my opinion. The Polish intelligentsia and Katyn and whatever, again, it was almost exclusively officer, and it was very obviously to secure the back rank. They didn't, this wasn't, they weren't going around killing random Poles or whatever, or genociding Poles. This was a coordinated...
Well, they basically did that during the Great Purges.
And a military...
They deported hundreds of thousands of Poles. It was ethnic cleansing. And even if it was solely the officer class, it's still a war crime.
It is a war crime, I guess. All sides did war crimes, unfortunately. That doesn't justify it, but you can go ahead and denounce any other country if you want morally. I wouldn't even say that the Soviets did all of that.
Literally, the Nazis and the Soviets were exchanging Polish prisoners to be executed by each other.
Yeah,
it's
I'll need
insane.
A source on that. I mean, I'm assuming you're talking about the Gestapo and KGB collaboration, but
they were exchanging Polish prisoners.
Listen, I know approximately the extent of Soviet-German collaboration in this period, and I'm not too even if this did happen, give me some numbers. Give me something.
I mean, tens of thousands were murdered straight up in the Katyn massacre.
Okay, you already made that argument at least.
And hundreds of thousands were deported. Hundreds of thousands were deported. Up to 600,000 Polish citizens were subjected to Soviet political repression, according to the Polish American sociologist Piotrowski. That was over
Googling stuff and
No, I'm giving you sources
that you just Googled on the spot.
According to estimates, because I'm backing up my position. According to estimates by the Institute of National Remembrance, 320,000 Polish citizens were deported to the Soviet Union. And these people were taken out to the gulags, and many of them died, of course.
Man. So your argument is that this is proof that the Soviets didn't expect the German invasion because they were preparing for a long-term occupation?
Partly that, but also I'm saying if it was simply about holding off Nazi Germany for a few more years, there is no excuse whatsoever for the joint invasion
for a few more years,
the joint war crimes, the massacres. Clearly,
wait,
the Soviet Union.
What did he say?
As Molotov said himself, first it was the blow of the Wehrmacht, and then it was the blow of the Red Army, and the bastard.
True, you can be poetic all you want. Okay, we already established.
It's Molotov. It's literally Molotov. He's representing the Soviet state.
I know, but Molotov in this context was poetic, so to speak. It was a propaganda speech. I know exactly what you're talking about. We can look at actually what happened. I don't need Molotov's representation of events which were published in Pravda or whatever. as affirmation of what happened. Again, the Polish
Wait,
army,
what?
by
Wait,
the second
explain that.
week of the German
Wait,
invasion.
explain that. Why? Wait, so you're saying we can't listen to Molotov's speech to the
No, I'm
Soviet
saying
Assembly?
it doesn't. We can look at what actually happened. We don't need Molotov's representation of this.
Well, we can. Yeah, we can look at what actually happened. They jointly destroyed the Polish state and they killed tens of thousands of Polish officers and intelligentsia in an attempt to make sure that there would be no Polish nation.
Captain was 16,000, wasn't it? You cannot say
22,000.
23,000. Okay.
22,000.
I feel like we're kind of in a deadlock.
But you can't explain why the non-aggression pact between the Soviets and Hitler had to involve the destruction of the Polish nation. A joint enterprise. It was a joint collaboration in the destruction of the Polish nation.
Listen,
and in that sense, World War II broke out in September 1939 with the Soviets and Nazi Germany as co-belligerents.
Was the Soviet entrance in the war 2.5 weeks after the war happened, after almost the entire Polish military was destroyed or in disarray, after
the Polish military plans. The Polish military plans were all
the Polish government fled the country. Even the Polish government.
They hadn't fled the country at that point.
Now. It was just about to leave the country. It would have left it in any case. Maybe the Soviets did. Okay, I can agree. They did objectively speed up the whole situation. Okay, but it wouldn't cost the Germans any much more than it did. In fact, it would have costed the Poles much more because the Germans were much more, obviously, brutal towards the Poles, even with everything that you're saying the Soviets did. Now, that's not to say that, the Soviets protected the poor Poles. Again, this was in the best Soviet interest to prepare for an eventual German invasion.
How does it help? But just explain to me, how does it help the Soviet preparations for war with Hitler to demolish the Polish state?
Captain officers, they were securing their back rank by destroying the military, decisively. So
how does that secure their back rank?
It does, obviously it does, because what do you think, the Poles will just stay idly or whatever if the Germans invade? I mean, this is what happened in Ukraine. This is what happened. The collaboration was not uncommon, is what I'm saying, okay?
If you just look at the Soviet actions later in the war, for example, they waited on the outskirts of Warsaw for Hitler and the Nazis to destroy the Polish resistance.
No, that's not what happened.
And then they move in,
No,
because the plan was always the hope was always.
No, the Battle of Warsaw was not coordinated or whatever by the Soviets that they wait for the Germans to do it. It was literally logistically impossible for the Germans or for the Soviets to intervene at the point which was very, very poorly communicated to them that resistance would rise up in Warsaw. Okay?
Churchill pleaded
this is
with
another
Stalin.
myth. What?
Churchill was pleading with Stalin.
Okay, but Churchill did not understand the situation at ground. This is actually, dude, you're just throwing out mostly myths from the 60s and 70s Western academia, which aren't even arguments in Western academia, let alone in Russian academia. But these aren't even arguments in Western academia by this point. It's well known that the Soviets physically could not have coordinated the liberation or whatever of Warsaw at the point that Poles wanted it to be.
I mean, the Soviets actually arrested the British mission that arrived on the outskirts of Warsaw.
One moment, please. Listen, it's 1 a.m. I'll have to be slightly quieter.
Listen, I can't do one of the 6 Hour Has podcasts that I did the other day because I've got work soon. However, we can do it again on the weekend because obviously there are other topics beyond the Molotov-Ribbentrop as well. Like, for example, is Russia a fascist today in the Ukraine war?
could do it at another time, I guess. I guess we can do concluding statements.
Okay.
Rev, do you want to organize this?
Well, do you want to do your concluding statement?
Oh, you go first. Okay, I started the argument. You can end it,
Okay.
or you can be the first to.
Okay. I've argued. I accept that the West failed in its appeasement strategy towards Hitler. I completely agree with that. The Czechoslovak betrayal was a terrible stab in the back. It never should have happened. Chamberlain was entirely wrong. I completely oppose the strategy of appeasement. That said, the non-aggression pact that was signed between the Soviet Union and Hitler and Nazi Germany was not simply a non-aggression pact. It obviously contained secret protocols for the divvying up of Eastern Europe between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. And it obviously extended far beyond just mere non-aggression. It became a pact of co-belligerence. And Hitler would not have invaded in September 1939 if he did not have this pact with the Soviets. If he was unclear about how the Soviets would respond to an invasion of Poland, he would not have invaded in September 1939 because he wasn't ready to. He didn't want to go to war with the Soviet Union in 1939, and no one was ready in 1939. It was an opportunistic invasion based on the fact that he had this secret protocol with the Soviets. He knew that the Soviets would not be intervening on the side of Poland. Instead, the Soviets would help to destroy the Polish state. The Polish resistance, their war plans were all geared towards an invasion from the West. They didn't have any plans for a Soviet invasion. They expected the Soviet Union to remain neutral. And so when the Soviet Union invaded as well, this is the final blow. Molotov himself regarded it as the final blow against the Polish state, which he said was the little bastard creation of Versailles. They helped to destroy the Polish state. The Poles fought very brave for 6 weeks. The West, France and Britain did not do enough to help, but it was really the Soviet Union coming in behind Nazi Germany that completely destroys Poland. Already they were fighting an uphill battle against Nazi Germany, but to be then wedged by another great state like the Soviet Union was the final blow. And so when World War II broke out in September 1939, it was with the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany as co-belligerents. They collaborated in the destruction of the Polish state. That is why the Soviet Union and the Nazi Germans, they transferred tens of thousands of Polish prisoners of war between each other. And it's why the Soviet Union arrested with the retreating Polish troops. And it's why the Soviet Union made sure to try and destroy all elements of they wanted to destroy the leaders of Polish national life in the areas in which they annexed, which contained 13.5 million Poles. It was a massive part of Poland. And so that's why they executed the officers, intelligentsia, anyone associated with Polish nationhood, anyone who could have been a leader for Poland following the war, following resistance. They wanted to make sure that Poland was destroyed as a state. And I also believe this is why later in the war, the Soviet Union halted on the outskirts of Warsaw to allow Nazi Germany to destroy the Polish state, to destroy the Polish resistance in Warsaw. And only after that point did the Soviet Union push forward and invade Warsaw. So I think it's very clear from Soviet policy throughout the war, the Soviet Union never wanted an independent Poland. Soviet Union always wanted Poland under its thumb, and they began World War II in a de facto alliance with Nazi Germany to destroy Poland. And this is why Russian attempts to say that they are the eternal enemies of fascism is quite hypocritical, because Stalin himself was happy to be a de facto ally of Nazi Germany for the first 2 years of World War II.
Throughout the entire period of 30s, starting with the rise of Hitler, the Soviet Union was the main instigator of every single anti-fascist initiative in Europe, starting with the Eastern Pact in 1933, 1934, during the Munich debacle in 1938, and then twice during spring and summer of 1939. In all of these situations, Poland was very important for obvious reasons, its geographical position, but also Poland was not very keen on making any should we say, good faith moves towards the Soviet Union, even when that was when it was supported by France and Britain, two countries which were, especially France, on paper seemingly close allies of Poland. And in this sense, Poland did do its best to make the initial stages of the war lonely for it. Didn't manage to establish any concrete alliances with any nearby powers. Even Romania, which was nominally also a big friend of Poland, couldn't do anything to protect it, and that was because it didn't actually have any concrete backing between those alliances. France and Britain were pretty, well, maybe not happy, but not very amused or interested into doing anything concretely to help Poland. And that was clear already when the negotiations between France, Britain, and the Soviet Union happened, when Halifax explicitly said to go as slowly as possible, and even after guaranteeing Poland when he was still open to the idea of negotiating with Germany. Germany, that is Hitler, already in April of 1939, had plans to invade Poland at September 1st or later. And when those plans were hatched, they did their best to put pressure on the Soviet Union and to all other relevant powers in creating any other alliance, to stop any kind of alliance from happening. Now, were they more interested in the Soviet position or the British position? And Hitler, fact of the matter is, explicitly said multiple times that it was the British position which mattered the most to him. And this was confirmed by Göring and other Nazis. And again, when Halifax started to show hesitancy around the Polish guarantee and around the German the alliance talks with the Soviet Union, that is when Germany kind of invaded, and when they put the most pressure on the Soviet Union that the war is about to start and they have to make a position. And from the Soviet perspective, there is no reason to stay numb, and there is also no reason to wait for the British to create any more initiative, because they explicitly said they wouldn't do any more initiative. In the period after the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the Soviet Union increased its military budget threefold. They created new defensive lines, and it was well known in their general staff that they were preparing for a war with Germany, and that's what eventually happened. The Soviet repression of nationalities, admittedly, I did not prepare too much for this argument because, frankly, I don't think it's very relevant to the discussion. And the Warsaw Uprising was not intentionally stunted by the Soviets. This is well known. I think even Wikipedia mentions this. And that's a very old myth and not really an argument that's relevant anymore. So that's about it.
All right. Okay. I mean, good discussion. I think it's better than whatever I had with Haz, where he just throws shit at the wall, etc.
Yeah, listen, I did not expect you would push so much on the Catton and whatnot, but we can address that some other time.
Yes. Well, listen, perhaps on the weekend, because obviously it's very late for you now and I've got to work, but perhaps on the weekend.
Right. I'm not sure where you work, but
yeah, we can
democracy
we can
NGO.
Debate, we can debate Russia and Ukraine the next time, and perhaps we'll do a video rather than Twitter Spaces.
All right. We'll see. All right.
All right. Thank you, man. Good. It was, even though we strongly disagree, it was a much more intellectual discussion than whatever Haz throws at the wall. So I appreciate it. We'll talk soon.
Well, I appreciate you didn't. You weren't late for 45 minutes, but only for 5
Yeah,
minutes.
well, Twitter Space is a lot easier than Discord or whatever that it was.
All right.
Okay. Talk soon.
Goodbye.
All right. Since the debate's over, I guess we could do like a 10-minute audience thing or nah?
Nah.
Nah. Okay. The Haas
Nice.
debate is not starting until another 45-ish minutes.
Bro, I got stuff to do. I gotta do some stuff real quick.
I have
All
something
right.
to do, and it's going.
Mac, did you
getting to
record?
bed.
Mac, did you record or no?
Am I bored?
No, he said, did he record it? Did you record it?
Dude, I did not record it. You said the Twitter
Okay, the
Space
Twitter- okay, it's
records
recorded.
All
itself.
right, we got the Twitter Space. All right.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Yeah.
All right, I'm ending it.
Drew, are you fine with this being posted?
Nah, fuck him. Who cares?
He's still here, dude.
I mean, it was